So yeah, I play football. Yes,
Right.
the round ball. However, I do play AFL as well. And I've been watching your videos. You know, it's not really. It does clash quite a lot. And I'm looking forward to reading your book, which really talks about that in the Australian context. So it's really cool. I'm really excited.
That's great. So you're playing multiple sports, which is wonderful. Of course, you know, I'm from football, so you know I love that above all else, as everyone understands. But what do you mean it clashes? What clashes?
So AFL and soccer, because we know that, well, football in general, like football is a world game, but footy here, as they call it, is an Australian game, and usually there's debates in the community, particularly like as a Black person, you know, playing AFL is out of the norm as a Black woman as well. So I get a lot of questions and debating all the time. But either way, I love both sports.
Sure. Look, my thing is come out of one sport, but I love, you know, everyone playing whatever sport it is. Obviously, you know, I want to introduce them to football. But, you know, ultimately it's all about, as this discussion's about, it's about people just having an opportunity to play what it is they love.
Yeah. So just a bit of some personal questions, because I really admire like you as a person. I think you were playing for like Adelaide City when I was born.
Wow.
Yeah, and I saw that you played for Crystal Palace. Like, is that the main club that you support now, or?
Well, I do, yeah, because once you play for one, you know, in a country like whether it's England or elsewhere, you can't support anyone else. So I still support the Mighty Eagles. It's been a lean few years, but it's always nice to see them. You know, when they win a game, I'm always pleased for them.
That's awesome. That's great. So today we're going to be talking about Article 24, which is the right to play, rest and leisure. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that particular article, because you are a long-time human rights advocate. And I did watch your TEDx talk about people power, and that was so inspirational, particularly your advocacy for Hakeem and just players in general and human rights, which is really amazing. So I wanted to know, like, what's your responsibility in upholding this particular right and in your space of human rights?
Okay, so it's, you know, Article 24, Convention on the Rights of the Child, is a really important one for a number of reasons. But for me, the first response when I read it is to just reflect, having come from Australia, about the fact that it's necessary to have a Convention on the Rights of the Child, firstly, and secondly, to have the right to rest, leisure and play, because in so many parts of the world, it's not a guarantee. And therefore, you know, and we often take these things for granted in Australia. So in Australia, we have our own issues, and one of them predominantly is access to play. So I did a talk last year, I mean the year before, with the Australian Human Rights Commission on the release of some new frameworks around rights of the children. I think it might have been a research report by the Commissioner on the Child Commissioner here. And I talked about access, particularly cost to play sport in Australia. And the reason why, and that's really important under this framework, in my view, is because if we start from the position that every child has a right, rest, leisure and play, what I argue is, what does play mean in Australia? Well, in Australia, it means sport.
True.
And, you know, leisure might be going down to the park and doing these things. Play is, in this country, usually organised sport. And through that, I saw your question, so I'm sure we'll talk about this soon, but, you know, that brings a whole range of possibilities and opportunities that it opens up for the particular child. So the biggest issue in Australia in terms of this article that I see is the prohibitive cost to play many of the sports in the country. And increasingly, and I'm certainly, I'm a big supporter of, ethical business per se. But when it comes to sport, I think it's been largely privatised. And I wonder whether, and my view is more that as a country, and therefore as a government, we have a responsibility to provide opportunities at low or where possible, no cost to every child in the country in order that they not only provide opportunity for life, for well-being, but it also is a smart investment, of course, because a lifetime of sport means empirically, less illness, less burden upon the public health system. So in the first 10 or 15 years, I'm not a medical practitioner, but you'll find that, the research backs this up, that the first 10 or 15 years of life, significant physical activity during that time in sport places a child in a better position physically in terms of overall health. That can then, and it can also form good habits.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with me, and I'm sure with you and others. By being really active in sport, it put us in a space where our habits of eating and general life habits were far more responsible and healthy than they might otherwise have been. Because within sport, there's a whole framework around that about how to eat and how to stay healthy, and so that you can compete to whatever level it is that you want. Doesn't matter if it's social sport. So what that means is the rest of your life, you're more likely to then continue the sport, and as far as you continue that, perhaps avoid more chronic illnesses and so on through a healthy diet and other things. So that's the proposition I'm putting forward. And and through that, what it means is, it's a wise investment by the country. Now, let's talk, if I just talk about football. In football, we've privatised our game very largely. And so for children to get either any coaching or the amount of coaching they require in order to try to excel, they often, if not overwhelmingly, have to join private academies. And I don't begrudge those people making a living. The point I'm making is that we're not providing the free or low cost service so that they can make a choice. We're just forcing them into those private situations. It costs a fortune. And where I come from, refugee, migrant, Indigenous, all of the social issues that I work in actively every day, I see that the kids can't afford to play. And therefore, it's a very significant issue for integration of the country, for socialisation of new arrivals, for health and well. It doesn't matter, whichever way you look at it, economically, socially, or in health and safety, it's absolutely imperative that Australia provides low-cost access to any sport that a child wants to play.
I can relate because, when I first started playing, it cost my mom an arm and a leg. And here we have something called kids sport, and it only covered $200. And the sport was it was about $500 as a teenager, and couldn't afford it. So I ended up not even playing. And my mom's on a low incoming card. And so it's really difficult. I can definitely, testify to what you're saying, particularly to those communities that, it's really hard financially. So
let me give you one example, shall I? So last year, or might have been the year before, but a club reached out somehow and got in touch, LinkedIn or something, and I'd never heard of them. I'd never been in contact with them. It turned out they were somewhere in I think Western Victoria or something, and they said, okay, we have in our town, we have a community of Rohingya refugees. Okay. And, and they're settling in beautifully, they're a part of the community, and we all help them through sport and so on. However, what's come to our attention is that they can't afford the fees. And the fees of the club, and we understand, and I understand that they cannot afford the fees. So the fees of the club are like $400, $450, something like that. Okay. And now I think there might have been I can't even remember, but it might have been 8 or 10 of these kids or more. And so, can you help us? And so, of course I said, well, look, I will try my best. But the real point was, I said to them, well, I didn't say to them, but later I would say to people, okay, I help them and we pay for those fees. And I'll tell you how in a moment. But the real point is, why did I have to?
Yeah.
And, you know, and just because that makes me feel good and makes others feel good and so on. Okay,
Yeah.
just, do you want to just hold on? I'm sure you guys are going to cut this up because, can you hear my dog?
Yeah, it's all right. Well, yeah, it's all
Okay,
good.
so let's just stop for 20 seconds. My wife just got home, so the dog's going absolutely nuts. Is that you, my darling? Hi, my love hearts. Listen, I'm just doing a Zoom here, so I've got to shut the dog up. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So you're still recording it. So, and just because that might make me feel good or others feel good, and we've done something good socially, you know, that's not the point. The point is you can only do it so much. And so my question was, well, okay, we help these ones, but how many other Rohingya refugees or Hazara refugees or yeah, sorry. It's just because I can't play this up in the room.
Oh, good.
Yeah, she's so happy. You want to take it out the back?
Pretty excited.
Yeah, she's very excited. The dog, to see my wife.
Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah. So, you know, or Hazara refugees, or you know, Indigenous kids, or you know, those particular two spaces, you know, or homeless. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, people are without, you know, long-term accommodation. They're living on the street. And big issue has a program called Street Soccer, where which I was an ambassador for a long period of time, and where we use football to bring them back and provide them some structure and some regularity, and you know, we try to encourage them to, you know, stay off substances and these things. So there's a whole part of society who are exactly like you and me and everyone else. We're all the same. It just so happens that they don't have the financial means.
Yeah.
The reason doesn't matter. The reason doesn't matter. They're human beings like you and me. And why should I have the opportunity to play just because I can afford it, and another child should have exactly the same opportunity as me? And they should be able to, if they have talent, they should be able to realise that talent. Like, that's a human right, in my view. You should be able to realise the talents that you're innately given in life, okay? And they can't in Australia right now. That's a reality. So I think you know, the country should really, you know, confront that. So there was actually a school that ended up paying for that. So I was asked to do a luncheon, and I said, look, I don't have time. I can't do it, you know. And then the club contacted me, and I said, okay, give me 10 minutes. I called the school back, and I said, look, I don't have time, but I'm happy to make time next Friday as long as you pass the hat around and you get all the parents to put money in, and we'll give that money to these kids. Yeah. And that's what happened. Wow. They raised like $5,000-$6,000, and we paid. But that's one season, you know, like I can't do 100. The rest lunches.
Of the seasons, yeah.
So that's the point.
From what I'm getting from you, it's not really your individual responsibility, but it's the responsibility of a collective, like the school, the clubs, for everyone to come together to.
Yeah, well, this is the question of society. You know, it's like the NGOs at the moment, right? So, you know, within COVID, you know, charities are picking up large sections of people falling through the welfare net. That argue the real question is, for all of us, is should government be looking after those sections? You know, why are charities going to the public, getting donations from the public to then perform a public service, which is to look after sections of society who have no support base? And so, you know, it's an interesting question which COVID-19 has really exposed for me, because you know, there's a huge, individuals are giving money, you know, as am I, giving money and giving time and giving energy. And that's because society has chosen that some areas of society are beyond support.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I think you've basically answered the question, the question beyond, and because it's deeper than just your responsibility. But we'll move on regardless, because I think your thoughts are quite interesting. So when did you first become a human rights advocate in life? So what happened there? Like, what triggered that kind of aspiration?
Well, I think I always was. I certainly, by the time I was an international footballer, a Socceroo I certainly was, because I would work in social programs through the clubs, or Adelaide City was a good example, and then I would go and help more. You know, I would coach with Indigenous kids, and I would use the sport, use my position in the sport to try and help people who didn't have the same opportunity I had. So it was exactly the same, just in a different way. And many athletes will do that. And then, you know, some of us just think, well, we're touched by it. And then so I'm going to spend more time there. And so then I would go and work with them, be heavily involved, you know, sometimes be a director of the organisation and help while I was playing. And then it just moves in different forms. It's the same, it's the same social responsibility. It just takes a different structure. So then it becomes, you know, to work across a range of social fields, which is all human rights. You know, the right to housing, the right to, you know, safe housing, okay, which is a human right.
Yes, safety.
You know, under the UDHR. And you've got, you know, the right to education. Okay, I believe in public education. I believe in choice. But I also believe in Australia we've gone, you know, too far one way, because we're not investing in our public schools. And I believe people, you know, people can make their own choice. And I've made different choices at different times with my children. But the one principle is you must provide outstanding public education. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a human right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, you know, all of these things, you know, I've worked in them for a very long time, or lent my platform, lent my name. The thing that just brings them all together is they're all human rights. And what I found is that people are often very active socially, especially athletes, and they often don't conflate what they're doing with human rights.
Yeah.
When they actually are. So, you know, many athletes will feel strongly about Indigenous Australian rights. And then when I talk to them about, you know, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, they say, well, I didn't realise there was one. You say, well, yeah, all Indigenous peoples in the world have a right to self-determination, have a right to the maintenance of their culture and of their language, and have a right to be included in all decisions by a government or a state that pertain to them. So, and when you start telling them that, they go, oh, wow, I felt strongly about it, but I didn't realise that the world has already made this decision. And then how Australia responds to that decision is a matter of domestic politics. But these rights, in my view, sit independently of any particular government that's in Australia. So that, you know, and then I started to bring all of the different streams together and understand that they're all part of the human rights framework, basically. And then I started to think, okay, so what is this human rights framework about? Because I seem to be really aligned with it. And then I finished my law degree, I studied it, and I came to understand it more. And then I realised, okay, this is really powerful from a number of perspectives. We have to always admit that it is contested. You know, not every culture, nationality, religion around the world agree 100%, but I do believe that there is a fundamental need for all of humanity to have an agreed set of principles about how we treat each other. I think that's incredibly valuable. And we can argue the margins, but the principle itself is incredibly important. Right? And so that answers your question. And then so over time I came, and then I got more heavily involved. I became an ambassador for Amnesty, Australia Committee for Human Rights Watch, and the Institute of Human Rights with UNSW, for instance. And so now I spend a significant amount of time in it, trying to also help shape policy, and I'm very committed to this concept of sport and human rights, which means, and children are part of that. So children's rights being recognised, embedded in statutory policy in all sport, so that this is one then, okay? So if sport abides by human rights, we actually then will have an obligation to provide access to sport for every kid in the country up to a certain age. And my view is that would be primary school. Every primary school child in the country must have access to any sport it is that they want to play. At low,
any sport,
at low or subsidised or no cost.
So how far is that, do you reckon? Like, if you were to say maybe in the next 5 years, do you reckon that could come around quite quickly?
Well, for instance, in New South Wales, they have a really good program. So one way that it's been dealt with is by subsidies. And so New South Wales government has a kind of voucher. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's
we've got kids sport here. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's one way they do it. And that is recognition by the government that there is barriers to access through cost, and therefore we have to step forward here. So, that's a really good example of, rather than fixing the system, just providing a mechanism to increase access. But even then, there's still a whole section left out. And my question is, how many kids are left out? How many kids just can't afford to play? And not just play, but play the sport they want to play. Okay. What happens if I'm using refugees at the moment, or Indigenous, simply because it's a simple one and I know it. But let's just say, a disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged family, let's say, and the kid wants to play tennis. Okay, now that kid should have the right to play tennis.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay? Up until a certain age, I believe, because I believe in the benefits, not just to the child, absolutely to the child, but also to the family, to the extended family, to the local community, and to the country. So there's concentric circles that go out of benefits from that child playing. Okay. And so, but tennis, for instance, like football, like we are really expensive. Okay. And we need to get it down. I'm a big advocate for that. Okay? Huge. But tennis is also, really expensive from my experience.
There's not a lot of kids who play tennis.
You do? So there's a lot of private coaching and all this, it's basically just user pays. And so, you have, I'm not trying to impugn tennis here. I'm just saying as an example, let me use football again. Okay. So no one gets upset. In football, it means there is an exclusion of talent. Okay. So we got 100% love to play football. Let's say 10%, I don't know, but let's say there's a percentage who do not stick with it. It's too expensive. Go to another sport, for instance. This is their love. And that means that child does not have the same opportunity as the rest of the cohort. And that's not right. That's actually against that child's human. Okay.
I agree 100%. I think that sporting associations could do better in that field. Accessibility and opportunities just to even have a shot at a particular sport. And tennis isn't the most famous sport, but if a child wants to play tennis, they should be given that opportunity. 100%.
Well, I mean, I don't care if they want to play lacrosse. Like the thing is, I just, I come from a country area, and when I grew up, we played everything. I played basketball, but I didn't have to buy a basketball. I played cricket, but I could borrow from the school's cricket thing, and when we went and played on the weekend, we could play at very low cost. And in the last 30 years, the cost has escalated hugely. And I just think it's a really bad trend. And part of that is because sport has become a commercial business. Now it's a
commercial business.
Okay. And in my personal view, we've lost the balance between, business and entrepreneurialism in sport and providing access, which is the first absolute starting point. The rest is fine. The rest is fine, but everyone needs to be given an opportunity to play. So it's really a very significant and increasing issue in Australia.
And a lot of talent goes missing. I mean, a lot of players from here go somewhere else because of that. There's no opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. So from a rights perspective, what that means is, so sports will often say, well, we need to get the cost down because, we're losing talent. Whereas, I don't really care about that. What I'm saying is those children have lost the opportunity that I had. Okay. And so people often say, well, as a former player, why do you feel so strongly about it? Is because I would not be sitting here. I would not have gone to 5 World Cups. I would not have had an 18-year broadcast career if I didn't have the opportunity, not just to go and play, but to maintain my performance and to excel in the game. And if it was high cost, like today, if I had to go to a private academy in order to achieve, because the game had been oriented that way, I would not be sitting here today. I'd be doing something very different.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So moving on, how would you explain the value of rest? A bit separate and leisure to the SBS multilingual communities, because you're a presenter.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, my field is sport, and I'm now, I work as an adjunct professor with Torrens University in sport and social responsibility. So if I say that play, let me talk about play. So rest and leisure is, of course, also important, and the reason rest is nominated as a human right is because I think is largely because of child slavery and child work practices in many countries. And you say that at a young age, they're already working 20 hours a day. There's no rest, leisure and play is really, where those first two came from. Right? And so, it's telling nation states that you have to ensure that children have time for this and can't be co-opted by adults into other things for their purposes. But when it comes to play for multicultural communities, well, it's incredibly important because it's actually a critical part of the social fabric. So, the Scanlon Foundation in Melbourne has this wonderful social cohesion index, and they do really detailed research every year, and they release those findings, and the index trends up or down according to whatever. And one thing that's really clear is that social cohesion is about minority communities, all communities, but minority or marginalised communities feeling welcome, having trust in the rest of society, having access to social institutions and feeling as though they have a voice. All of these are questions within the index. So what sport does is it provides all of those for every community. So through sport, every community can connect to everyone else. And I'm not just talking about, when I say broader, I mean, they can connect to communities that they also have enmity with. So there might be religious tension, there might be ethnic tension, there might be, all sorts of tension, right? And through sport is one of the very few vehicles where those communities and those kids can come together and work in a space that is, a shared space according to certain rules. It's a really valuable, when you're talking about building social cohesion, it's a really valuable vehicle to build that. And so therefore, to the extent that we don't have access for kids, then we don't have, Rohingya kids playing with Australians of every ethnic background. Okay, so we're actually limiting their opportunity. At best, let's say they might have that in school, you would hope. But this is another vehicle where there's emotion, where there's fun, where there's, sport brings things that class at school doesn't, I have to say, was my experience as a kid. And therefore, we're limiting their ability to socialise within the Australian context. That's how important sport is, right? And why do I want that to happen? I want that to happen I want we're talking about a minority, okay? It doesn't matter who they are, okay? I want them to interact with let's just say broader population or whatever, right? So that these people can understand that they're the same, right? And, and I want this broad to interact with them so that they can better understand them. And it's through these interactions.
Just cut out for a little bit.
Okay.
It might be.
Yeah, and through these interactions is where we build understanding and break down barriers, or at least we create relationships which outside of sport allows us to break down those barriers. So, it's not always true to say that, I play with someone I've never met or a religion that's not mine or something, and that just breaks down barriers. That's not true. but it personalizes and humanizes and normalizes that person in a way that very few things can. So then when the discussion happens later, I can then talk to that person because we share a love of football. And so it's a starting point. It's a table at which to sit that we can build our understanding. And those tables, those bridges, it's a bridge to understanding, sport is. And that there's very few bridges in the world that can build understanding like that now, because so many things now are used to divide. Religion can divide. You know, I mean, it can also unite, but, you know, it can divide, and politics can divide. You know, there's more division in the world now probably than ever. Sport is a very rare and valuable beast. It puts us on a level field, and it gives us the opportunity to talk about this shared, I love, you know, Crystal Palace, and you love Arsenal. Oh, that's interesting. You know, what do you reckon about Mo Salah? You know, you know, I like Jurgen Klopp, right? This is exactly the point, right? And then we end up laughing, and then I say, anyway, where are you from? And you say, you know, I'm from XYZ, and I say, oh, gee, you know. And then you say, but I do this and that. And I say, oh, I didn't realize that. I always thought you guys were a bit like this. You know, I read that you guys are something like this, and you laugh and say, no, that's just ridiculous. Actually, we're not even like that. What we do is X, Y, Z. I say, okay, all right. That's how it works. That's how it happens. And that's social cohesion really in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And I think the atmosphere at a game, for an example, it's non-political. It's very exciting. And there's no really space to be negative, because everyone's in the same room, either celebrating and really cheering for their team. It's kind of outside the, you know, the debates of, you know, the typical things that really break people apart. So
can be. But we've also seen in football 100%. That, you know, if you have different backgrounds and they have enmities, then they also bring that to the game. Okay. And but the point of football is that instead of fighting, you know, and you know, gangs or whatever, you actually come to football. Now those enmities might be there, but at least it's a space where you're able to interact in a different way.
Absolutely.
And that's why I said it's not true to say that it breaks down all barriers, but it provides a very rare opportunity to break them down. Okay. And then, you know, sport is about equality. So there are many issues within sport which are deeply politicized. However, sport is about equality in all its forms. And therefore, we can discuss those issues in this kind of shared safe space around you're the same as me. Okay. When you get outside, people would say that issue is political. Whereas often it's just about human rights. It's just about equality. It's just about opportunity. Okay. So, you know, you always need to be careful in sport about this term of political, because very often things have been politicized. But that doesn't mean that they're political. So, for instance, human rights are not political. Human rights are universal and objective. However, they're deeply politicized.
Okay. Why is that, do you reckon? Is it because people just don't understand? Or
no.
They just...
No, it's because political ideology cuts across human rights in many, many ways. Okay? So if you're, for instance, anti-immigration, then by definition, then, you know, you are, you know, you're going to run adrift when it comes to the, you know, International Convention on the Rights of Refugees. The status of refugees, right? So political ideology and beliefs about how society should be ordered are often contrary to the universal human rights that people possess. And that's why the refugee space is a really good example. When you say to Australians, yes, but all of these asylum seekers have rights under international law, they say, well, yeah, but Australian law says X. How can that work? And it's because, you know, domestic law in a dualist legal system like Australia means international law is not automatically domestic law. It must be brought to life in domestic legislation under the Australian Parliament.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this
definitely.
is the difficulty, of human rights in kind of broad understanding. People say, well, if those rights are there, why is that permissible? Why is that legal?
Yeah.
Well, that is because the Australian government of one type or another has legislated away their obligations under the International Convention, even though we're a signatory.
Yeah.
Always,
Which is strange, because a lot of the responsibility with rights falls under the government. They take the most action. And when we try to rally and advocate, it's usually a backseat.
Yeah, so that's when you say it's politicized. So the rights of refugees under international law are objective. They are in black and white. They are really clear.
Yeah.
But it becomes deeply politicized because different sides of the political spectrum take differing views as to what immigration law should be here, and don't agree with what the international community says should be a minimum right of a refugee.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's when it becomes political. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the reality of rights.
Would you say it's also the same for a lot of the other articles, like the right to education and that sort of thing?
Yeah, totally. It depends on which country, but in a place like Australia, many countries, in fact, Australia is the only Western democracy which doesn't have a constitutionally entrenched Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And that's why many of us support one, because there's constant argument here about the rights of, refugees, and these things that we see as just a really basic standard are constantly up for grabs. It's constantly open to any government to, try and take the country that way.
Yeah.
Whereas when you have an entrenched Bill of Rights, it just means, look, you know what, everyone has basic protections, and let's just get on with the rest of it. Right? So here we're still arguing just basic parts of what we would see as people's rights. And a lot of it is just an utter waste of time. We could be doing...
I couldn't agree more there. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think we're going to keep going around in a circle for a while until someone really... Yeah, so let's go to you now. How do you currently practice this right? What are you up to these days in your personal life? Are you playing and coaching? Yeah.
I was coaching for about 6 years, elite young kids, so-called, boys and girls. A lot of the Matildas who'll come through in future years. I coached for 3 or 4 years.
Cool.
Here in Sydney, it was lovely. But I typically just spend my time now. I've left full-time SBS, although I'll.
Yeah, so sad to hear.
Yeah, look, SBS doesn't have much football content anymore. And so, there's other things to achieve. But, when big major events and things comes up, it's always open to go and, and help.
Have fun.
So I spend my time, I'm an adjunct professor with Torrens University, and I'm lecturing at the moment into sport and social responsibility. So these concepts of what sports social obligation is really front and centre. And I'm thinking about doing some research into it. In a couple of years, I might do PhD in it. And I'm working in human rights a lot. Throughout COVID, been doing a lot of volunteering. Running a campaign, Play for Lives, which is about sport, volunteering, and stepping up to help out. And so there's a lot of really interesting things. Basically, it's just all about largely sport, not totally, but largely about how sport can contribute to creating a better world, rather than just providing opportunities for people to play. What is sport's obligation to actually talk about and help these issues?
Yeah, no, that's really exciting also. So just to wrap it up, what's next for you in this space? Is this for life, this sort of work? And what are you hoping to?
Yeah, this, since I was early 20s, this kind of work has always been here. It's just been in a different form. So this they'll always be here, trying to help people in different ways. Whoever it is that needs help, if I have an opportunity to help and a platform to help them, then I'll always do. So there'll always be broadcasting, there'll always be some media work, whatever form that takes. There'd always be involvement in multiculturalism and trying to bring communities together.
So exciting.
Particularly about sport, about what sport can do to, assist the world in different ways.
Amazing. And I saw that you had a chat with Akech McCool.
Yeah.
She's actually from here, one of my best friends.
Yeah,
she's amazing. Yeah, we played footy. We played a few matches together. Wow. I played for the WAFL, which is the Women's Football League.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, she's amazing. She's just doing a brilliant job. Yeah, and what I really love is she's a strong voice,
Absolutely.
She's a strong voice for inclusion. She's a strong voice for multiculturalism, and she's certainly a strong voice for the South Sudanese community in Melbourne, who've been attacked a number of times.
Yeah.
And I love to see, and she's young, so she's brave. And I love to see athletes supporting her and other people supporting her. And encouraging athletes like her to use her social platform now to help her community and to help Australia by educating people into, why it's inappropriate to attack any particular community, on the basis of their, background or race. So I think she's doing a wonderful job. She's just growing as a social advocate, and I think she's not only an unbelievable athlete, but she'll be a real game changer, which is what we want to see. That's what athletes should be, in my view.
Absolutely. And that's what you're advocating for, more of people like her to step up.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. So if there was anything that you could say to a young child aspiring to be a footballer or play any sort of sport, what would you say? I mean, it's kind of cheesy, but what would you say to them if they were watching this?
Look, I would encourage them to do so, but I would say at the same time, make sure that you also, study hard. Your education is just equally as important. And most of the most effective people as former athletes around the world have been able to educate themselves. Many of that happens after sport. But if you can do during, make sure that you focus on that, because both of them together, sport is a powerful platform. And if you succeed in it, you can create, a whole world. But if you then also, really focus on your education and get an outstanding background there, the two of them put together is an extremely strong combination. Okay?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. All right. Well, thank you for chatting with me. It's been so insightful, and I'm so inspired, like all the time admiring you from, the TV. It's really cool to finally chat over.
Okay, that's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in and ask one really quick? Sorry.
Sure.
But I particularly love the section about building bridges that very much speaks to the mission and purpose of the museum. Something we're very focused on is starting conversations. So I'd ask, what are some of the questions you use to approach this dialogue?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the real benefits of sport is that it's a highly visible, highly influential social institution, which people love, and it's very prominent. And so sport has an ability to create conversations in society that are really important. So, one of those is sexuality, for instance, so whilst, LGBTI Australians within the business context might still have been having challenges, in the sporting context, we saw many lesbian women, absolute champions of cricket and Matildas and other things, and very confident to speak about it, confident in themselves. And that's a really important role that sport plays, to demonstrate that we're all the same. That's ultimately at the end, it's about equality. Okay. Another really good example about starting conversations, which ended really badly for the athlete, but in my view, didn't really have to, was about Israel Folau. So Israel Folau was, talking, in religious terms, and had some strong views, which in my view were not accurate. And I certainly disagree with everything he had to say. But the point about what he was saying was about a balance of rights, a balance between, religious freedom and, and the right to religious views, and the right to, non-discrimination. And so, and this was a balance. This is where these, not all rights are absolute, of course, under human rights. Many of them have to be balanced against each other. And so that was actually an opportunity for sport to have that conversation and facilitate that conversation in society. But sport's not really used to doing that. And so the automatic response at the moment is, well, that's really, that's confronting to a lot of people, which it is. And therefore, we have to cut him. Whereas that conversation could have been, well, what are these rights? Where does this balance lie? And that's actually a conversation is actually going on in society. So sport, amplified it and then, is really sensitive, doesn't quite know how to manage that situation. And it's controversial and it's difficult. But the reality of much of human life is difficult. Okay, so that's why we call them conversations. That's, the point about conversations in society is what we're saying implicitly is this is really tough. And we don't want to upset everyone. So we're just opening this space so that we can all talk about it and talk around it and, try to come to a shared agreement. That's what we say. That's what we mean when we say, we're starting conversations, right? Well, sport does that brilliantly. It just doesn't quite know how to manage it yet. And I think that was a really strong opportunity for it to happen. Yeah. As it happened, it doesn't matter our personal views. I disagree with what Israel said, and that's obvious to everyone. But I just think, what sport does now is say, look, that's controversial, and therefore, we need to just cut him, and get rid of him. Now, he might have had to leave anyway. Like his employment might have been ended anyway. All I'm saying is, and that might have been appropriate. All I'm saying is that was an opportunity for a really important conversation, in society. It's about, religion and, and really secular human rights. Okay. And that's a conversation that's not going away. And it's not going away in sport if I have anything to do with it, because I believe that sport has to uphold human rights. And if we're going to uphold human rights, then we have to uphold them all. It's no good saying, well, I don't agree with that guy over there, and therefore I just want him out because I disagree. It's about saying you have to, we all have to be capable of saying, well, hang on a minute, this is about a balance in society, and where does that balance lie? And if the balance was found to be, on the wrong side, then, the same outcome would have occurred. All I'm saying is we just missed the opportunity for the conversation.